You're listening to Puma Podcast.
If we aim to fulfill our pledge to the Paris Agreement, we need to boost the share of electric vehicles in the total projected vehicle fleet nationwide. The government aims to increase the share of electric vehicles to 10% or hopefully 50% by 2040.
Hi, I'm Franco Luna Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News. You just heard President Bongbong Marcos speaking at the launch of Chinese company Dongfeng Motors in the Philippines. Dongfeng, which in Chinese means east wind, is bringing commercial e-vehicles into the country. And using e-vehicles makes perfect sense.
Considering our continued dependence on imported fuels and the volatility of oil products in the world market, it is only sensible that we encourage the shift to electric vehicles. We not only get savings in fuel and gas, but also significantly lessen our greenhouse gas emissions and champion sustainability in our day-to-day activities.
Look, we're all familiar with the crowded buses, the long waits, and the toxic smell of exhaust fumes. It's enough to make even the most ardent environmentalist question whether taking the bus is really worth it. Because all around the world, the transport sector is often among the ones that contribute the most to greenhouse gases.
Safety reminders, manatili po tayo nakahawak sa mga safety hazards.
But what if there was a way to make public transportation not just tolerable, but actually desirable? Enter e-vehicles. Electric buses, trains, and trams are not only better for the environment, they're also quieter, smoother, and even more comfortable to ride. They've been around for some time now, but they're only just recently beginning to make serious headway here in the Philippines. And that's because
So it's one of the key motivation of the Philippines to push for e-mobility. We're losing so much of our reserves from so much of our dollar reserves by buying petroleum, and it allows us also to diversify our energy utilization.
yan si Manny Bayona, Executive Director of the Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines. Imagine gliding through the city streets without the rumble of an engine or the noxious fumes filling your lungs. Sounds pretty good, right? Even the Department of Transportation says it's time to ditch the fumes and embrace a cleaner, greener commute. We're talking electric buses, trains, bikes, maybe even scooters zipping through the streets. The DOTR has also admitted it's studying the possibility of having all public transportation be fully electric. This only means it's not just a pipe dream. The government's actually offering incentives like tax breaks and soft loans to jumpstart this e-vehicle takeover. But it's not as simple as that.
So where are we on this? So technically, as with everything else, there's really a complete system that you need to convert over to an EV environment. Of course, that's not the physical vehicle itself, but you need now the grid components, the battery system, the charging infrastructures, different type of energy sources, which we would like to prefer to be renewable rather than coal-fired, and to be able to put that together. This will incur a significant amount of effort, both from the government sector as well as the private sector.
That's Arthur Tan. He's CEO of Ayala-led AC Industrials. He was speaking in a webinar on building an e-vehicle ecosystem organized by Livable Cities Philippines. The era of the EV has already begun, both here and around the world. In fact, Surtech Holdings Philippines, a company here, is partnering with a Chinese company to make electric motorcycles. They plan to start production this year and hope to sell 1 million motorcycles in the Philippines within the next few years.
And I think that's the main driver that we all have to go look at this. So we're at the perfect moment, I think, from a Philippine standpoint, that we're now at a point where we can actually determine the infrastructure setup that we want to do in order to pick and choose the type of EV infrastructure that we want that will work for us.
But the Philippines has not adopted electric vehicles as quickly as other Southeast Asian countries, even if the government is starting to promote them. Surtec hopes their new motorcycles will help to change that. In October last year, the Electric Vehicle Association of the Philippines projected that cumulative sales of e-vehicles in the country would reach 6.6 million units by 2030. And for a country that relies on fossil fuels as much as we do, that's not a bad target.
What we're trying to do is we like to have the ability to bring forth here in the Philippines at least the capability and the technology that if we decide as a country that this is really something that we want to be part of and to lead and to leapfrog because of this new field that is happening in the mobility space, is that we have the ability to start touching on the vehicle manufacturing, the distribution, the retail, and the after service as a complete vertical for the whole ecosystem to provide that into the market.
The Philippines is aiming to increase the share of EVs to 10% of the country's total fleet by 2040 for all sectors. That's according to the comprehensive roadmap for the electric vehicle industry. As I said earlier, the transition to electric public transportation isn't without its challenges. Listen to how Conrad Richardson describes it. He is Senior International Tactical Advisor for Sustainable Mobility in Metropolitan Regions. He was speaking at a recent forum organized by the Asian Development Bank.
When we think of EVs, we do need to think of the batteries and their life cycle. First, we need to produce the batteries. And given the many different minerals, this is quite a complex and dirty process. And this process itself contributes to almost 50% of the CO2 emissions of the entire life cycle. Then these batteries, they need to be used in the vehicles for X amount of years. And as you know from your smartphone, they degrade over time, they lose their efficacy. And eventually the batteries, they become no longer useful as stores of energy for vehicles, which is when they need to be reused, repurposed, and eventually and hopefully recycled. And the topic of recycling is a very big topic.
On top of the immediate issue of battery life and production, electric vehicles are naturally still more expensive than their gas-guzzling counterparts, and the infrastructure for charging them is still in its early stages. The lack of charging infrastructure also generally makes it harder for car buyers to warm up to e-vehicles, and because of these, many car makers with promising models are wary about bringing their products here.
One of the major factors for Philippines is pushing for it is to support industry development. We feel that this is a good chance for the country to make a mark again in the automotive industry. I think it's very clear in here that there's a very strong relationship across the different barriers. As I mentioned earlier, one of the main motivations of Philippines to go into electric vehicles is to be one of the main players in the EV industry. But one of the key barriers for the competitiveness of the local EV manufacturing industry is a lack of demand.
We're pausing for a quick break now. When we return, we'll tell you about what more the government can be doing to support the transition into fuel-free vehicles in the Philippines.
Definitely, when we modernize the vehicle fleet, we can have vehicles that are more fuel efficient and even possibly fully electric. And that also offers the possibility of lower cost energy for our public transport. And if we want to keep fares relatively low, one way of doing that is to shift to more reliance on electric vehicles for our public transport fleet. So this is one of the great opportunities today.
That's transport economist Robbie C. of the Move as One Coalition in an earlier story on Teka Teka News. Robbie says the opportunity is there to capitalize on, but only if we focus on moving people and not cars. That's because at the end of the day, it's also worth pointing out that electric cars are still cars. And that is, they are still the most inefficient mode of transportation when you consider the space they take up on the road versus the amount of people they carry.
When we look at electric vehicles, there are also concerns related to when you charge the vehicle, you also use electricity. And when you use electricity, you're also using fossil fuels for that matter. Not unless you charge it using solar charging station, for example. That would actually make it clean. The problem with electric vehicle is that we are not actually helping our cities decongest. So we somehow, for example, lessen emission because of that. But the spaces that these cars actually use is the same. Pareho pa rin silang car.
That's Rhea Pescador Malyari. She's Sustainable and Living Cities campaigner for Greenpeace Philippines. She makes an important point here. While they do help out the environment, heavy EVs like cars do little to solve the transport crisis we're seeing in Metro Manila.
Pareho pa rin silang using that space that should be dedicated for the 94% of Filipinos that are commuters. So you still compete with the road space. And the problem with that is you actually don't help people or the public or the general or the majority of Filipino have the right to be mobile, have the right to have a dignified transport journey every day.
But hey, every journey begins with a single step. And with the government offering incentives for operators and manufacturers, we're definitely on the right track. Even outside of financial assistance, the Land Transportation Office also gives e vehicle users priority in the registration and renewal process, while the Metro Manila Development Authority considers them exempt from the number coding scheme. Car owners are certainly abuzz about e vehicles because of the exemption to the car use limitation scheme. So, yes, we are pulling out all the stops to support a transition. The lack of infrastructure is what it is, but the Department of Energy has committed to rolling out around 2.45 million EVs and 6,500 EV charging stations around the country by 2028. And with the PUV modernization program in full swing, the opportunity is there, but only if the government is willing to extend more support to the sectors affected.
Recently, costs of electric buses have gone down, so the main issue would always be the higher upfront cost, and that becomes a problem if the market segment itself don't have access to financing or have limited access to financing. In some countries, some of the bus operations are informal in nature, so they have very limited capacity to finance the uptake of electric vehicles.
As you know, backlash to the PUV modernization program is continuing to the new year, and that only means that any attempts to modernize transportation hinges not only on technology and infrastructure, but also the financial and social costs it would impose on drivers and commuters alike. If the government wants to see EVs rolled out at a faster pace, it would need to do quite a bit of training and handholding. For one, it's still very much a new and emerging technology in this side of the world, after all. And two, many Filipino drivers and operators of jeepneys and other public transport vehicles simply can't afford them at this time.
And they have also very limited access to financing. So if you couple that with higher upfront costs, then that becomes now an issue. Another issue also would be technical in nature. Number one, technology inertia. So whatever convincing you would do, they would always say that, okay, diesel buses are better than electric buses. Well, it's because they've been using it, they trust the technology, and especially if this is in the operations is informal in nature, that's where the livelihood depends. So they'd rather adopt something that they're used to rather than adopt something that is new. There's also that aspect of skepticism in terms of availability of parts, availability of technical support, and also electric buses are more complicated to operate.
They're not the only solution to traffic and climate change they're being framed as, but the potential benefits of electric public transportation are undeniable. Cleaner air, quieter streets, and a healthier population are just a few of the things we can look forward to. And let's not forget about the health and economic benefits. Investing in electric vehicles can reduce pollution, create new jobs, and boost the local economy.
For some countries like Philippines, for example, air pollution is an issue, so it's also part of the air pollution program of the country. And there are also a couple of governments that have surplus renewable energy, like Laos, for example. So they're pushing for EVs to utilize whatever spare capacity they have, and of course, power is very cheap in Laos, and they're importing the petroleum, so it's also for energy security. It's very
So the next time you're tempted to hop in your car, consider taking the bus, the train, or even that snazzy new electric scooter. Your lungs, your wallet, and the planet will thank you for it. And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Franco Luna. This episode was edited by Pidoy Blanco. Our Teka Teka News executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior editor is Veronica Uy. If you found this episode useful, share it with a friend, help Teka Teka News reach more people, and keep the show going. Thanks for listening.